Hi, I'm Sunny. I'm Sonlight's community manager and a homeschool mom of two kids who have been educated with Sonlight since their preschool years. And I am being joined today by Lisa and Sheila, and we are going to be talking about releasing control in your homeschool. So sometimes as the homeschool parent, we want to hold on really tight and be perfectionists and all the things, but sometimes things don't work out the way we expect or the way we plan. So we want to offer you some encouragement if you're going through that, or maybe share some things that could happen down the line. So Lisa, welcome. Why don't you tell us about the children you homeschooled and maybe the hardest season of your life, homeschooling or post-homeschooling with those kids?
So I am Lisa. I have homeschooled two of my three children. One of my children did go to public school, but my two youngest, I homeschooled all the way through to their high school graduation. Probably the hardest season in our homeschooling was that we pretty much the whole time were caring for terminally ill parents. And it wasn't the same one over and over. It was one would pass away and the next one got sick. So there was a lot of control that I did not have over a lot of things in our homeschooling because of those situations. And so that was probably the biggest obstacle that I had in my years of homeschooling.
Well, thank you for being here. Sheila, you're up next.
And I have three kids. We did homeschool all three. The oldest one did go to high school, but the other two we homeschooled all the way through, and now they are all through college and working and out in the world. My hardest season, well, I actually had two. Early on, we struggled with a child who wasn't reading at the same level as his peers. And it kind of came to a head in third grade. And so we had to figure out what was going on. So that was a tricky season. And then that same child, when he turned 15, he went through some emotionally unstable times. And those were trying seasons. He is now 27 and we have a great relationship, but it was really hard there for a while.
All right, well, great. Yeah, probably my hardest. I've had two really hard phases in the homeschooling journey. One of them, I also work full time in homeschool, and I always have. But there came a point right around the time of the pandemic. I was working in healthcare and ended up working 60 hours a week. And I had my youngest was in kindergarten, and so I was trying to teach him how to read. And he wasn't learning it, and I was busy and impatient because I was just so strapped thin. So that was a very challenging season for us. And then also we did a big move to a new state where I didn't know anyone, and I felt very isolated and alone at that point. I was homeschooling in a new area, but I had one friend from college that I knew here, no family, no support system. And so it felt very much like I was alone and with my kids all the time and very emotional, and they were seeing that. And so I felt like I was also failing them as their mom, because they were young enough at that point that they'd be like, why are you crying? Why are you upset? And it was more my own personal emotions and why am I in this new place where I know no one and I hate it here and all of this. Spoiler alert, I'm here 7 years later and love it, but at the time it was really hard. So we all go through those seasons that are hard, whether we're homeschooling or not. But I think when you're homeschooling, and especially if it pertains to the child that you're teaching or one of the children you're teaching, it feels a lot harder. So let's talk a little bit about the determining why you want to homeschool and how that helps when things get tough. I know we often tell people if they're burnout or they're struggling, hang on to your why. But how do you figure out what that is and why is that so important?
Early on in our homeschool life, my husband and I sat down and we decided that we were going to come up with goals and a mission statement. Like, he's an engineer and he very much lives by those things. So we did. We named our school. We came up with a mission statement. We came up with goals for each of our kids and for our school. And we also named our why. Like, why are we doing this? And why, what is going to keep us doing it when it is hard? I literally have an elementary school in my backyard. And there were days where I thought, I'm just going to go walk down to this school and put these kids in school. And I would have to pull out that sheet of paper that we had typed up so that I could remember my why. Like this was and some of my whys, I mean, everyone is going to have their own whys, but one of the reasons was so that my husband and I could be the primary influence in our kids' lives. We did not want to relinquish that control to the public school or even the private school. We wanted to be in control of what they learned, when they learned it, how they learned it, who their friends would be, all of that. And I know a lot of people will say, that sometimes homeschoolers live under a rock or under a bell and they're not exposed to things. And I would use the hot house analogy that I am raising these tiny little baby flowers. And when the time is right, I will harden them off and I can plant them outside in the harsh environment. But for now, while they're under my care, I am going to protect them. And that was my, one of our biggest things.
Yeah, I think as our family was called to homeschool, we were not a homeschool family. Obviously, I had one in public school. I worked full time. It was not anything that was on our 10-year plan or anything. But as the Lord worked in our lives and we sought his will, it became more and more apparent that this was what he had for our lives. And I think that was the thing that when it was really hard, I kept going back to. Sheila and I were just talking last week about growth, and growth does not happen when things are easy. Growth happens when you're stretched. And I know that the years that I spent homeschooling were stretching and they were growing. And my faith is very different at the end of my homeschool journey than it was at the beginning of my homeschool journey. And I think just returning to that, this is what we are called to do. This is God's will for our life. And it's better to be miserable inside the will of God than to be having a party outside the will of God. So that's what kept us and what we held on to.
Yeah, and it's interesting when people talk about this, because I actually, when I started homeschooling, it was kind of an accidental thing. We were moving. I didn't know where my daughter was going to go to school. And I thought, oh, I can teach her. She's young enough. This won't be that hard. And then when we move, I'll put her in the local schools. I really had no plan to keep going. But I saw her start to thrive, even at her young age, almost immediately. And I thought, oh my goodness, look at this child who she's excited about things. She loves to learn. We already had good conversations. She's incredibly communicative. And all I kept thinking was, if I put her in kindergarten, they're going to tell her to be quiet. She'll be in trouble for talking all the time. Yeah, because she was so used to spending time with me. At the time, she was an only child and my husband was traveling a lot for work. So oftentimes it was just the two of us. And she was used to, if she had something to say, she would just say it. And I thought, school is going to crush her. They are going to crush this love of learning and her fun personality. And she was super confident. And I thought, well, I'll try it one more year and just see if I can teach the academic things. And we kept going and she kept thriving. And it wasn't until she was about second or third grade where I had some challenges with like work and scheduling. And I felt very stretched that I even looked at the schools. And then I thought, you know what? I'm feeling sick at the thought of putting her in here. I don't want to ruin all the awesome things that we've had and the child she's becoming. And she loves learning. She didn't feel weird about that, where I think, a lot of kids, once they're in school, it's not cool to enjoy learning or all of those things. You have a lot of those social peer pressure things. And so it was really probably 5 years in before I realized just how much I actually felt we needed to keep homeschooling her. So I think some people, are called before they even have kids, but then there's others of us who kind of accidentally develop that calling as time goes on. But I do know when times have gotten tough since then, or I feel very strapped and very busy, I'm like, oh no, but they're thriving, they're growing, they're learning. We are the primary influence. We get to have a good relationship with our kids. Now that daughter is 14 and she still likes me most of the time, which, you know, if you're parenting a 14-year-old, you know, that's not always the case. And so it really, I think, solidified for us that no, we need to keep going. But when it gets tough like that, I love what you said, Lisa, about that stretching is when you grow. And I absolutely agree that when you're homeschooling, there are hard days, and having that there does develop a stronger faith as well, because you learn to rely on God. Let's talk about the perfection piece of it. I know I very much have thought perfectionism my entire life. That's one of my earliest memories, was trying to follow all the rules and get all the A's and do all the things the perfect way and be the best behaved child, which of course becomes a source of pride for a lot of perfectionists. But how do we fight that when we are responsible for our child's entire education process, and not cling so tightly to what we can do by our own strength?
Well, I think that is a very big part of what God taught me over homeschooling. I am a perfectionist. I was the get every question right. Can I turn this in early and get extra credit for turning it in? And I noticed that in my oldest daughter, she also is a perfectionist. And I think in God's sense of humor, he showed me how ugly that trait is by revealing it in my daughter. And I was like, don't do that. But then I was doing it myself. So I do think most homeschoolers are going to be type A perfectionist go-getters, you know, that's, or else we wouldn't be doing this. We would be like, sure, you could do whatever. So I do think it's difficult to see that in your children, to recognize it in yourself, and then really pride. That is the thing. And I repented of that many times because, like I said, God used my child to show me how unattractive. It's good to want to do your best. That is a good thing. It's a strength, but strengths can go so far to become detriments. And he showed me that that was because not only do I expect it of myself, I expect it of everyone around me. And news flash, only one perfect person, and they're not bodily still on earth. And so we need to give people grace. And that was the whole lesson for me, was I was given so much grace because I messed up a lot while I was homeschooling my children. I needed to extend all of that grace I had been given. I couldn't hold on to it. I needed to extend it back to those in my home and those that I encountered outside my home.
Yeah, and I, like Lisa, I too tend towards perfectionism. Not quite as successful at it, I guess I would say. So what I found was that what I loved about homeschooling is that it protected my kids from having to compare themselves to all these other, classmates and rank themselves according to where they stand in class. So in some ways, we protected our kids from perfectionism because they didn't have as many people to compare themselves to. I mean, they had their classmates in Sunday school class and things like that. So like my son figured out that, oh, I'm not reading like where my friends are reading, but it wasn't that daily ranking of, oh, did you get an A or did you get 100? Oh, I got a 98. You got 100. Like, you're better than me. Like, it protected them from that. We didn't even do grades until high school. Like we just learned. So, so it wasn't even that they had report cards and they could compare that with their friends and rank themselves. So in some ways, again, protecting them from that outside influence. Eventually it came. I mean, in high school, they did dual enrollment classes, they took co-op classes. So it's not like I could protect them for forever. But I love that we didn't start kindergarten with, oh, did you get an E or did you get an S on the report card? And I also loved that we could camp out in an area that they were not strong in. Whereas had they been in school, if they didn't grasp immediately reading or a math concept or whatever, they would fall behind. And in our homeschool, we didn't have to fall behind. We could just camp out, and just because the curriculum, the instructor's guide, you had to turn the page and move to a new week, that didn't mean that we had to move on. We could just wait and or skip it and come back to it. I remember early on, kindergarten, first grade, the math curriculum we were doing, my son was really struggling with telling time, like the whole clock and the hands. Later we found out he's dyslexic, but at the time I didn't know. And so I didn't looking back, I can imagine those hands were just moving all around in his, poor little head. And so we set that aside. I was like, okay, we're not gonna do time now. Let's move on to shapes, whatever it was, And then when we came back to it, he was further along. He was better prepared to learn that concept. So it was easier to extend grace because who's watching me? There's no homeschool police. There's no, someone watching me to make sure I'm doing things in this order or in this way. And so it was easier to just be like, okay, this isn't a big deal. We'll set it aside. We'll pick it back up. And that helped me in my own life, right? So I could extend myself grace in other areas as well. I could be less perfectionistic about things. And it's just, when you don't feel like you're constantly failing, you're just a much happier person. It's just, there's more joy.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to remember, if you are a perfectionist, you are holding yourself to that standard that most people or anyone probably does not care. I know I oftentimes will be like, but this has to be done. This has to be done. I've got to do this and I've got to do this right. And all the different things. And then, of course, go figure, I'm married to the most laid back man in the world. And he's like, who cares? Why are you freaking out about that? That doesn't matter. And so I think it was really interesting to see, as my kids got older and I kept homeschooling them, that it was, it's me putting these impossible standards on myself and sometimes them. And then I realized, wait a second, they're children. They have different personalities than me. They learn differently. And it's easier to give grace to your kids than yourself sometimes. Like you said there, Sheila, that it allows you to give yourself that grace more when you realize, oh yeah, we're not behind. We're not comparing ourselves to anybody else. And I agree, that is one of homeschooling's strengths, is that your kids don't really know where they rank relative to their peers. I remember the first time now in Colorado, we have to take standardized tests every other year. And the first time that my daughter took one, I was like, I think you're going to do well, but I don't actually know. I was like, I hope you know what you need to do. And my son is taking his first one now. So we'll see, same thing. You don't really know because they haven't been in a classroom with other kids, but I promise you Sonlight does work, and you will find that the kids are learning everything they need to. But you briefly touched on comparison, like in the classroom. What about comparison as homeschool families? I know it can be really hard when you see, like on Pinterest or some other social media, like, oh, so-and-so has this beautiful space and her kids are always well-behaved and listening and they're so smart, and all of these things. How do you keep yourself from comparing to that? Or what about the opposite, where maybe you see someone who you think is just a total mess and you're like, well, my kids are doing better than that family. How do you keep yourself from getting caught in that comparison trap?
Well, I think it's important to remember, not just with homeschooling, but all social media, we see the highlights. We don't know how many times they took that picture to get all of their kids looking angelic, or that they just set up their homeschool room, but 20 minutes later, the people moved in and it didn't look like that anymore. And it hasn't ever looked like that since. I think that, again, is a lesson that through working through the hard, we learn. Comparison is the thief of joy. Whether we are feeling superior to someone, that only feels good for a little bit. And then it doesn't feel so good anymore. And definitely when we're comparing ourselves to someone who we think has way more than we do in whatever area it is, that doesn't make us feel good. So I think that's knowing where your identity comes from, knowing what is important to you. So maybe that person whose homeschool room is beautiful, that is the most important thing to them, but maybe their kids are miserable or they're eating cereal for dinner. I don't know, but we just don't know the whole story. And so we can't compare our whole life to their highlight reel.
Yeah, and when we first started homeschooling, we didn't have social media, so we didn't have that. But I could still, find myself comparing myself to friends at the park and whose kids are well behaved and not interrupting or not hitting other kids, or whatever the case may be. Or they have a method of parenting and I don't follow that method, and it irks me when they come put their hand on their whatever, just. Like we can't help but compare, and yeah, I think it's going to lead you. It's always going to be bad. It's always going to lead you to either pride or guilt or inferiority or feeling of failure or whatever. What I like to tell moms in the Sonlight booth at homeschool conventions is, look, once you make your decision, and we're usually talking about Sonlight curriculum because they're standing in the Sonlight booth, but once you decide, put the blinders on and don't look left and right. The grass is not greener on the other side. The grass is greener where you water it. So water your lawn, focus on your work. Keep your eyes on your paper like we used to get in school. Don't have wandering eyes, and just ignore as much as you possibly can. Ignore what other people are doing. Because yes, nowadays with social media, you're only going to see what is fabricated. It may not be real at all. And even if it is, it's okay. Everyone is on a journey. The Lord is working on me. He's working on Lisa. He's working on Sunny. He's working on everyone. None of us have arrived. None. So just keep trudging along, doing the work that he's given you to do, and give yourself grace.
Yeah, absolutely. And remember that God gave you your kids. He didn't give you somebody else's kids. He didn't give them you as their mother, father, any of that. You have your kids to raise. That's your job. So I know, yeah, for me early on, that was something where I was so excited about homeschooling that I was like, oh, the whole world should homeschool. And I was excited about it. But then people were like, so are you mad at me that I put my kids in public school? And I was like, that's your kid. I'm just excited and trying to share it with you. But remember that it's your kids. And even if you found what works for your family, you don't have to worry about everybody else. We are not called to worry about everybody else. So that's something that, being the type A kind of busybody that I am, sometimes I have to remind myself of that. But let's talk a little bit about putting faith in God instead of your homeschool. I think sometimes, again, whether it be a source of pride or just the fact that if you're doing this for so long, your identity gets kind of wrapped up in, oh, I'm a homeschool mom, that's part of my job. So how do you make sure that you're putting your faith in God instead of your homeschool or your own abilities or, this identity as a homeschool parent?
I think the first thing is, the first roadblock you hit, you start out kindergarten, everything is great, and your child is learning his colors and whatever, can color within the lines or whatever it is. And then you hit that first roadblock and you start to really doubt yourself. Am I doing my child a disservice? Should I put my child in school and leave this up to the professionals and all the things? And that is when we really have to go to the Lord and seek his direction. Lord, I feel like you called me to this. Is it time to go down a different road? Do I need to put my child in school? Do I need to get outside help? Do I need to get a tutor? Do I need to have my child evaluated? Is this beyond me? And many times I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me was my scripture, because I felt like I can't do this. I have an education degree, but it's for high schoolers. I can't teach to read, and I can't do high school math. How am I going to do this? But the Lord will provide a way out. So whether it's through a friend who can do math and you have a friend that you can call and say, help, or you put them in a co-op that's going to teach dissection because you're going to puke if you have to do that. Whatever the case may be, you bring your needs to the Lord and he will show you what you need to do, whether that's put them in school or keep them home and find help, whatever it is.
Yeah, I was just talking with a customer yesterday. No, not yesterday, because that was Sunday. I guess it was on Friday. And we were talking about that thing that the Lord called you, but he didn't say, okay, and then next year you're going to do this, and next year you're going to do this, and then this is this, this, this. He just said, trust me enough to be obedient. I have today. And when you wake up tomorrow, we'll have the same conversation I got today. And he is so very faithful. And I think it's important to remember times in the past that he's been faithful when we feel like something is not going to go. He's been faithful in the past. He doesn't really have any choice, honestly, but to be faithful. So we just have to trust him. And that's easy preaching, hard living. But I think that's part of the stretching and the growing is that, in whatever your circumstances, and this does not necessarily only apply to homeschooling, just that where's your faith? And your faith cannot be in the curriculum, and your faith cannot be in I'm going to homeschool these kids and they're going to turn out to be fabulous, because that's not guaranteed. There is nothing in the Bible that says if you do X, Y, and Z, you will get this child. Those children are just like us, sinners, and just like us, they have free will and they have to make a choice. And that was a hard lesson for me to learn, that my kids are not fighting against me. I didn't make the rules. They're fighting against God. Those are God's rules. And God is big enough to deal with all of that. I don't have to. My job is to stay in my lane, like Sheila said, and do what I'm supposed to do and leave the rest to him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, the pandemic years actually taught me that a lot. I think I thought I was trusting God to take care of everything, because I felt like I still had, a certain semblance of control over things as well. And during the pandemic, when everything shut down, it was very eye-opening for me that, oh, no, I'm not really in control of anything, even though I think I am. And then it also made me aware of my own mortality in a way that I had not been before, where it was like, we're not guaranteed tomorrow. Am I living what God wants me to do today? Because I don't know if I'll be here tomorrow. And, that's something that I think we think of, but then at the same time, we're like, oh, well, I'm going to live to be 100. So you don't really think of it as coming, soon. And so, yeah, so I don't know which of you said it, but something about each day waking up and asking that again. And, God promises us our daily bread, not our weekly bread, monthly bread, 18 years of bread, and so it's remembering that every day that, I have to say, okay, I need you today. I don't know what's going to get thrown at me. I don't know, how my day is going to go. I don't know how the kids' days are going to go, and you've got to just roll with it. I love too, Lisa, what you said about you can do everything the right way and your kids still have free will. They have their own personality and their own sin. And so they may not turn out exactly how you expect them to or want them to. So what do you do in that situation, or how do you guide them as they start to mature without, I don't know, getting frustrated with the fact that they're not you, they're not going to respond the way you are, they may not do what God wants them to do? How do you react to that?
Well, I think just reacting with grace, and saying, gosh, I realize it's a hard decision, and here's some of my experience. They don't like it when you call it wisdom. It is wisdom because you've lived there, but here's some of my experience. I want to share it with you, but I understand that you are a person and you are going to make choices. And while you don't always agree with my choices, how many times did they tell you this isn't fair? You shouldn't do that to me. Why did you take away my Game Boy? Whatever that is. I'm not always going to agree with you, but that doesn't mean I don't love you. And it doesn't mean I'm not in your corner. And should it go terrible, I'm still here. If it goes great, I'm also still here. I have a quote that I wrote in the cover of my Bible, which I can't recall exactly, but it says that God did not intend for you to get into the wreckage of the train wreck, but should you find yourself there, he will get down there with you. And I have shared that with my children over and over. They're not going to ever go anywhere that God isn't with them. And that's the good places and the bad places. And he is big enough to manage all of that. And as hard as it is for me to imagine that he loves my children more than I do, he does. And I just have to trust him, which is hard. It's hard, but that's the daily walking out of my faith. Is that today I say, okay, here's these people, my heart walking outside of my body. You take care. And he does.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about finding your identity, maybe as an empty nester homeschool parent, or after, if you've dedicated 20 plus years to homeschooling these kids, they've been in your home, and now you're launching them, what do you do after that? Or how do you move on to the next phase of life? Because that's hard for any parent when their child moves out and goes on to their adult life. But especially when you have spent so much time and poured so much into them. So how do you move on to those next steps with adult children?
Well, I'll tell you that it's not that bad. Like being here on the other side, I used to think, oh my gosh, my whole identity was so wrapped up in being a mom and being a homeschool mom and, my kids. And we spent so much time together. And I thought, I would start crying when I would think about my kids leaving the home. But we have some friends who are a little further down the road from us. And so I would watch them. And when their girls got to be driving age, I would think, how does she sleep at night? Like, how does she let her kids drive away from home? But she did, and they were fine. And so when it was our turn, I was like, okay, if Connie can do it, I can do it. And so, that happened. And then when it was time for the first one to go to college, I think God has a sense of humor. Like he makes teenagers be difficult sometimes so that it's like, okay, you know what, you just go and go. Like it's not that bad, like when they're small, they're just so sweet and you just want to cuddle them. But as they get older and they're not quite as sweet, maybe they stink a little bit. It's a little easier. It's not easy, but it's a little easier. So when that first one went off to college, he was the one that we had a really hard time with in high school. He had some emotional stuff that was going on. And I was really worried about him going off to college. Like, is he going to be okay? But I had to release him to the Lord. Like, Lord, he is yours. And you called me to raise him until he was grown. And now he is under your care. Like he has left the nest. And then so with each subsequent child, I have 3. So with each subsequent child, it got a tiny bit easier. I like to tell folks, like, most people go through their hard crying bouts when they drop their kids off at kindergarten. For homeschool moms who homeschool all the way through, that starts at the freshman year in college. It's like, but it does get easier with each child. And I think the biggest thing is you have to work hard at maintaining your relationship with your spouse, because that's who's going to be left when all the kids are gone. So I sure hope you like your husband today and you continue to like him through the years, because we are having a blast, my husband and I, and we love our kids and we have great relationships with them. But we are number one in each other's lives. Our kids are not number one. And even though my identity was wrapped up in what I was doing with them at the time, it changes, just like everything in life changes. And so we're having a good time.
Yeah, I think as my kids have grown, I do have to shift my focus. I don't have to work so hard at being their mom with, do this, don't do that, step here, don't step there. But I do get to shift to that friend. I love the relationship I have with my kids, and my daughter just had a baby, so that has sweetened our relationship immensely. And the older your kids get, the smarter you are. So you used to be really, really smart when they were like 3, they thought you could do everything, and then when they were 15, you were like the dumbest person ever to walk the earth. They don't even know how you tie your shoes every day. But as they get older, you do get smarter again, and you have that opportunity to change your relationship. Just like Sheila said, I have some friends who haven't changed their relationship and they're struggling. They still want to be in control, and you cannot control another adult. Obviously you're not married if you think that, because that's the first person you learn you can't control. You cannot control your adult children, but you can be friends with your adult children. And it's not a friend like Sheila and I are friends. It's not how I'm friends with my daughters and my son and my daughter-in-law, my son-in-law, but we are friends, and they do seek my opinion. I offer it just like that, an opinion. You cannot tell them what to do. And I think that's where people struggle with releasing their identity, is that I'm your mom. I've always told you what to do. No, I'm your mom. I'm on your side. That's what you switch to. I'm in your corner. I'm your biggest cheerleader.
Yeah, I feel like we switch from being the parent that is in control to being the coach, and then to being a consultant. So like you're slowly, your hats change, and those parents who want to just always remain the boss, those are the ones that are going to break the relationship with their kids when they're grown, and the kids are like never going to want to come home and not want to have anything to do with their parents, because they feel like the parents feel like they should still be able to rule your life and tell you what to do and what to wear and who to be with and all that. And you can't. They have to take responsibility for their own lives at some point.
Yeah,
I think that's a beauty in homeschooling, that you do make those changes gradually, because you went from teaching everything to do this and come back and check in with me to do a whole lot, and we'll chat. So I think it does ease you into that change. I like those words that Sheila had, that you're the boss and then you're the coach and now you're the consultant. That is a great way to look at it. It doesn't have to be sad, because you also do get to have a lot of fun with your husband.
Yeah, well, and I love that, because if you've done it properly, your kids should launch, right? Like they should go out on their own. And so, yeah, I think that's hard to think about. Sheila, I loved what you said about how they start out cute and cuddly, and then as they get older, they smell or they throw attitude at you, or some of those things where you're like, okay, you can have your own space. But I know that was something that I'm very close to my own parents, and they always said that okay, well, when you're an adult, then we'll be your friend. Right now we're your parent, but once you're an adult, then we'll be your friend. And I remember in high school, when I was throwing attitude at them, my dad would say, oh, I can't wait till you're 25. When you're 25, we're going to be super close. And he would hold on to that, like, okay, we've just got to get through these hard years. And then what you guys said about your spouse, that was something that I heard. I think I was married, but I didn't have kids yet. And I had heard, like, make sure that your marriage is the strong relationship, because your kids will grow up and they will move out, and then you're stuck with that person. And so you better like them. And so that's something that even when we had little kids or we were busy, my husband and I have always been intentional about, going on dates together and doing things just the two of us, because I don't want to be that couple that my kids are grown and then I'm like, oh, I haven't really talked to you for the last 25 years. What do we do now? So yeah, I love what you said. Also, to me, not having launched any kids yet, I am gleaning so much wisdom from Lisa and Sheila and some of our other Sonlight mentors who have launched kids. And I think one of you said that earlier, that finding someone a little further ahead in the journey is super helpful, because one, you see that, okay, it turned out okay. So that's very reassuring if you're like, oh, it's not going to work for me. But also it gives you those tips and that advice so that when you are in that situation, you know, like, oh, okay, I don't want to mess this up. So maybe I won't tell my 22-year-old how to live their life, but I'll just offer suggestions or, you know, whatever the situation may be. What do you do though when you feel like you failed in some way, or you're failing now, and you know you couldn't control everything and it feels like it's a mess? You know, how do you, I don't know, rectify that or come to terms with the fact that maybe things didn't turn out the way you hoped they would?
Well, I know for us, when we first started homeschooling, I had this, you know, Norman Rockwell idyllic painting in my head of what it was going to look like and what my kids were going to be like. I would have spelling bee champions. None of my kids can spell, you know, like all these things. And some of our goals for our kids were spiritually related. And we had all these, not expectations, but hopes and dreams and desires for our kids. And I thought, you know, being the primary influence in their lives and blah, 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 and modeling it for them. I mean, my husband and I have quiet times every morning, and, you know, more is caught than taught. I mean, all these little things. And then all three of my kids, none of them are currently walking with the Lord. And I cling to train up a child in the way he should go. And when he is old, they will not depart. They're not old, you know, they're still on their journey. So I think part of it was a bit of an idol for me. Like, you know, if I do it this way, then I'm going to produce these kids and we're going to always sit together in church. And, you know, and my grandchildren will, you know, we'll take up 5 pews. And that's not the way it's turned out. But I have a great relationship with my kids. They're not afraid to talk to me about spiritual matters. They know what we believe. They know when they eat at our house, we're going to say grace. Like, just because they're not doing that doesn't mean that we're not going to do that. We are true to ourselves and what we believe, and we continue to model it for them. You know, I'm not just doing it. It's not just a show. This is who we are and this is how we live. So they know if they're spending the night at our house because it's Christmas or whatever, and they get up early, we're going to be in our quiet time chairs because that's what we do at 6 a.m. And so just like they come to us when they have a question about, do I need to change my tires at so many miles, or, you know, adulting kinds of things, my hope is that they will come to me or to my husband when they're ready to have talks about, you know, the faith, and their doubts and their weird ideas that they've picked up along the way or whatever. So if we have expectations that our kids are going to turn out a certain way, you lay that down right now on the altar. That is an idol. And you need to give, you know, just like Abraham was willing to give up Isaac to the Lord, we have to lay that down at the foot of the cross and be willing to say, whatever your plan is, Lord, for these kids, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I think when you feel like you're in the midst of a mess, it is important to realize where our strength comes from, where our peace comes from, to not allow circumstance to dictate how we feel about God, because God is steadfast. He has not changed. He's in the fire and he's in the sunshine. He's in both places. And that has been something, as I watched my mom die in front of me. I mean, she just wasted away. It was hard. Like, I remember asking, where are you in the midst of this mess? And he was very clear, right here, doing the things. How do you think you're getting through this? It's not because of you, it's because of me. And so I think when we find ourselves in that mess, we just have to constantly speak the truth to ourselves that, okay, if I did something wrong, I need to repent, and I need to repent to God. I need to repent to my children, to my husband, whomever I have wronged. That's the first step. And then I just need to do the next right thing, because it didn't get messy overnight. It's not going to get cleaned up overnight. I'm going to work through it. And I think, just like Sheila said, when our kids watch us do that, whether they are doing it for themselves or not at that time, they're still seeing that, oh, this is, and not just our kids, other people, this is real. This is, our faith is not tested in the easy. Our faith is tested in the messy. And that's when we're showing whoever is watching us, this is real for me. This is how I do things. This is what I'm doing at 6 a.m. This is what we're doing, because this is the only thing I know that's going to get me through. And so when it's messy, I think we just have to turn to the only person who's capable of cleaning it up, and that is not ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. And all the prayers that you can put on your family and whoever. I remember my mom praying for me my entire childhood, and I'm sure she still does. She talks about her grandmother and her parents praying for her. And so, yeah, when you get to that point, I mean, really, it should be our first go-to, but sometimes it's not, where you feel like there's nothing else, pray. And I mean, that's what I've been doing with my kids. Anytime they're away from me, I'm like, okay, God, I'm not with them. I won't be able to see what's going on, cover them, take care of them, all of those things. But even when they're with me, bad things can happen, right? And so at the end of the day, that is always my go-to is I can't do this. I cannot do this on my own. Sheila, earlier you gave us Philippians, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And it's praying and okay, I'm at the end. I can't do this on my own. You've got to do this for me, and I have to trust you. And that, I think, is the hardest part. But I appreciate you two reminding us of that. Sometimes you need to hear it from someone else because you forget or you're struggling and you feel like you can't claw your way out. But Lisa, I loved what you said about God's there, no matter where you are, even in the train crash. Hopefully you're not there, but if you are, he's there with you. So ladies, I really appreciate everything you've shared today. We're running tight on time, so we're going to have to go. But again, also, if you are watching here at Sonlight, we pray for you daily. So send us your prayer requests. You can do that through our Sonlight Connections app or our Sonlight Connections Facebook group, and we will pray along with you for whatever situation is going on, whether it's homeschool related or not. We want to pray for and encourage you. Also, if you just need encouragement or advice on something, get in the app as well, because our mentors are there. All three of us are in there, and we will give you practical tips, but we'll also give you, spiritual tips, encouragement, and pray for you as well. So make sure you join us there. We would love to help you out with your homeschooling.